Sean Haney here with RealAgriculture.com. I'm joined right now by the Canadian Cattle Association Executive Vice President. It is Dennis Laycraft. Dennis, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, good morning, Sean. It's quite a day to look back.
Yeah, no kidding. So, Dennis, we've been talking all week about the 20-year anniversary. We sort of talked about how we're not really celebrating it. We're sort of commiserating, reflecting. Reflecting is the best way to look at it. We've heard a lot of the emotional stories from a lot of producers and what they went through and still how it impacts a lot of people today. We've also heard from Ann Wasco, who at the time was with Canfax, now with Gateway Livestock Exchange, and some of the fundamentals on how things changed. 40% less producers since 2003, 25% less of a cow herd. Those numbers are real to they mean something to all of us. You were in this position at that time. When I say 20 years ago this happened, I got to hear from you. You were on the inside. When you first heard, what was your thought?
We both, Neil Yonke, our president, and myself, received a call on May 18th that we had a highly probable case of BSE. I guess, there'd been a risk assessment done in 2001, which had suggested that we were beyond that risk, that our measures had been in place. So, it was one of those you hope beyond hope that it doesn't turn out to be a confirmatory result, but you kind of knew that the odds were stacked that it was going to be. So we had a bit of time, and we were told in confidence as well, strictest of confidence. So we had to start preparing. And fortunately, because we'd found a case of BSE in an imported animal in 1993 in December, that had kind of triggered why we had started with our ruminant feed ban, why we'd created the national ID system, why there were a whole range of other measures in place to prevent, first of all, any introduction of BSE through borders and importation of potentially infected material, and as well on any live animals coming in. We destroyed all of the imported animals that were still alive in 1994. So with all of those things in place, we knew we'd already taken some very substantial risk reduction measures. But of course, we'd watched what happened in the UK, where they didn't know anything about it. They didn't even know what BSE was in 1985, 86 when it started to show up. Then when it was discovered in Europe, you saw consumption drop 90% initially, and then it would come back up to about 90% of previous levels. It took about a year. Japan had just gone through finding it there. They had saw a similar reaction. So we knew the borders would close with a confirmatory result, and then there'd be a major investigation. And furthermore, we want to make sure that we maintained the trust of Canadians, and because we had taken measures to ensure that our beef supply was safe. So there were a lot of those things going through our minds at the time, but it was really then preparing for the press conference in Edmonton on the morning of May 20th, and making sure as we did that, there was we were going to have the most transparent investigation, which Canada did. We've been cited as kind of the model example of how an investigation should be undertaken. As you may recall, CFIA, we worked closely with them. They invited in an international panel who took part in the investigation. And because of our veterinary infrastructure, we were able to do an investigation like that as efficiently as anybody in the world. So, we as we headed into it, we knew it was going to be the darkest day the industry had faced probably since 1952 when FMD was discovered. But we were even more export dependent in 2003. So it was clear we would have not just the BSE front, but there was the whole disaster mitigation work. And ironically, we were at that stage with the FPT conversations where our disaster programs and everything had expired on March 31st.
Oh, right.
And they hadn't reached an agreement on their replacements.
There's some initiative to get it done all of a sudden.
Well, I remember being told, well, we'll have it done by June. That was true, but it was June 2004 when it was actually done. So, we got into kind of uncharted discussions on how we put in place programs to, help producers survive.
Yeah.
Through this. When you have borders closed and that, you get market paralysis. And I expect Ann talked about this, but you don't even, one day, cattle were live fed cattle were worth $1.04. The next day you had no idea what they're worth or if anybody would even take them for a period of time. So when a market has that, it just becomes paralyzed. So, basically there wasn't cattle moving to markets for a period of time. So that was kind of the first 48 hours, I feel like.
Well,
And then, we got into things in more detail.
yeah, like that press conferences, you're talking about it. And I may be missing some significant events. So, people will correct me. I know you will as you're watching this, but that might be the most significant agricultural press conference of a generation. Like I think of, obviously there was, during the pandemic, people think of that, but that was different. You got, the single desk going away with Canadian Wheat Board, that was more of a celebration for a lot of producers. You give a lot of speeches, being involved in that press conference and relaying that kind of news. There's also like the response of here's the facts, but there's also like you're trying to comfort people to, and there's a lot of unknowns at that time during that press conference too. So you got to be careful what you say, especially when it involves trade partners around the world. 40 countries closing their border to Canadian beef exports. You had to be a little bit shaky that morning.
Well, as I said, we'd had 48 hours to deal with the gravity of what we were facing, and we were well prepared. I'd been studying what had been happening in the UK, in Europe, in Japan, and we knew, that was pretty much it gave us an idea of exactly how serious, not just the trade closure, but the whole risk in terms of losing consumer confidence and how real that was in other markets. And we were prepared to talk about that. And, I guess there's not really any advantage of ever finding, but when you find it, by 2003, there was a lot more known about BSE than when the UK was dealing with it. And, we knew it had never been found in any muscle tissue, the infective material. And if you remove the specified risk material, it's perfectly safe and to eat beef. And, that was kind of the unknown previously. So, we could talk about that in the conference. And one of the great things that happened that day was they were interviewing Secretary Ann Veneman with USDA, and we'd been trading back and forth a few million head of cattle every year. So and 2002 happened to be a huge drought year. You may recall Hay West, and so we'd send a lot of feeder cattle south because we were short of feed. So they'd been notified about this ahead of time. We talked to NCBA about it in confidence just ahead of the conference, so they weren't surprised by it. But she came out and talked about she was confident in the safety of Canadian beef. And to have, your largest and most important trading partner and the leader of that for agriculture come out and say that, I think was an extraordinary event to occur. And certainly, I think as we headed into the next couple of weeks, we saw something really quite remarkable happen. again, we had put in place a whole bunch, we called kind of these multiple hurdle food safety measures to keep BSE out. And so if there was any BSE that had gotten in, it would be very, very rare and isolated events, which is what it turned out to be. And the conversation about the safety of our product, and by Father's Day, we actually had a shortage of beef in Canada. And I don't know whether you recall, but there was one chain, a burger chain, that had talked about not carrying any Canadian beef. They were going to use all imported beef. And
Yeah.
in Regina, and there was a 4-H club from Mortlach, Saskatchewan, went in, and and when you had all of these young kids picketing, it wasn't too long till we saw completely the reversal. Suddenly, the media looked at this, and it really came across as the market closures were really actually unfair to the Canadian industry. Our product was safe, and you may recall there were barbecues that started up across the country. But what also happened was it shifted from companies thinking about bringing in imported beef to carrying only 100% Canadian beef. And we saw consumption, instead of like other countries diving, it actually went up almost 70% in July as Canadians rallied behind our industry. And that probably did more to save our industry than all of the government support. And, it also sent a message to other countries like, the US and Japan and Mexico had announced their reopenings in August, that, there was this growing sense of confidence completely about the safety of Canadian beef. And so there were a lot of things that kind of, you get the worst of times with the market paralysis and all of that, to where suddenly when you have, in those days, I think it was closer to 32 million, but 32 million Canadians rallying behind your industry. And, I'm sure that also resonated in Ottawa, as, they would have been debating about what sort of disaster relief needed to be put in place. So it was those first 60 days were, not just the press conference, but I can assure you it was probably the most intense 60 days anyone could ever live through.
Yeah, I was talking to Leighton Kolk, feedlot owner from Southern Alberta, and we sort of sparked the memory together of Prime Minister Paul Martin coming to Picture Butte, and we're in the community hall, and him talking about the situation, how the government had people support, and we haven't had a prime minister back since. So, but still, I remember being in the room that day and the significance of that. Behind the scenes, trying to, like I said, 40 countries. So you probably pick a way, you try to choose the U.S. border, of course, being the most fundamentally important because of our adjacency in the two-way trade, as you've talked about. What was that like? In you mentioned the support from the USDA secretary out in public, but behind the scenes, trying to get that border reestablished. What talk about that a little bit and how that went.
Yeah, it was, we went through a period where we had an interesting, maybe just the first few days that led up to that. Every morning we had a briefing on where the investigation was. Then we would have a board call to inform the provinces and our board what we were briefed, and then we would deal with media for almost 8 or 9 consecutive hours. I think the first day I did 160 media interviews, and that just kept going with scrums and things. So every country is paying attention to all of that too. So we're doing interviews in the U.S., interviews far away as Australia, So everyone was watching this very closely. And, we remember Dr. Brian Evans, he really did a great job on behalf of CFIA as we went through this. And we had such a good relationship between him and Dr. DeHaven in USDA. You may remember Dr. DeHaven. So as you start to work on getting borders reopened, that relationship between the chief veterinary officers is absolutely important. And there was the transparency between Canada and the US. We'd actually invited one of the US panels on. The external panel was from the US, and then at the same time we were working very closely with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association and the American Meat Institute. In those days it was the American Meat Institute. Then we would travel, and we ended up going, it wasn't unusual to have a weekly trip somewhere in the States, but usually to Washington. At the same time, we were trying to deal with the disaster relief measures up in Canada. So we were going, really, there was almost 60 days there where between Neil and I, and, I had Brad Wildeman working on it as well, Ben Thorlickson, Arno Dirksen, and I could go on that list. But when you did get home, I never bought a single return ticket for the first 60 days. And you just come home and refill your luggage, because you knew you weren't coming. Wherever you went, you were going somewhere else. You weren't probably going to come home any longer than to basically drop in, get changed maybe one night at home, and back on the road. So there was just a relentless effort by a lot of people and the embassy in Washington, I would add, that's when we first met John Maswell. He was working down there.
Oh.
And ended up working on this file with us. There was just this, effort that really, you'd start with briefings out here at 6 a.m, and you'd probably wrap up your phone calls or your travel sometime around 10 at night, which those of us that grew up in agriculture, that's not unusual during the peak days when you got to get things done. But it was quite an extraordinary effort to try and balance out. There was no happy ending till we got those borders open.
Were you like, as you reflect on, there, like you said, 2.5 months later, I believe it was, there was a partial opening, and then I if my memory serves me correct, we were like 26 months from like back to, was that
live animals? Yeah,
yeah.
It was August 10th was when the U.S. and Mexico pretty much almost within a day. Now, by the time you get the procedures, it was kind of getting into early September when we started, and that was boneless, under 30-month boneless beef, which is
live
very
animals
important.
26 then, 26 months.
Yeah, 26 months. You may recall it was going to be sooner.
Yeah, there were starts
and
Judge there.
Judge Siebel, there were a group, and it was largely RCAF, got an injunction blocking the reopening to live animals. So we had to go through the circuit courts, and we were, again, that's one of the great strengths of the checkoff, is we were working very closely, obviously, with the government of Canada. We were filing what was called amicus briefs on this in support of USDA, and they were working to get this injunction thrown out. And we eventually did in July 2005, I believe it was. And it would have been open quite a bit sooner if it hadn't been for that court injunction. But interesting, at the same time, we started to see a very substantial expansion of the Canadian packing industry. By the time we did reopen, we were actually to the point we could pretty well process all of the animals we had in Canada. But that's when we ended up with the set-aside programs, kind of 2003 to 2005. where we had that backlog. We actually had a lot of cows that remained in the herd. They're worth very little to take to market. So, we had a much larger cow herd as well because of BSE, and kind of counterintuitive, but that's what happened.
Yeah.
Because of the market reality. And then, unfortunately, as we started to recover from there, you may recall that decade wasn't just about BSE. We went into that period where suddenly our dollar went from 72 to 74 cents US to over $1.10 US, which of course, our price is based off the US. That took about 40% out of our market there. And then we hit the Great Recession. So you went from that real peak where we had the highest energy costs, and I think at one point oil hit $1.40, and we had that high currency, and then everything fell apart. So we went into the Great Recession, and that affected international demand, and that softened prices as well. So it was just went, I've often referred to it as it kind of turned into that perfect storm scenario. And, we were pretty happy to see 2011. That was a decade we didn't mind putting behind us.
Yeah. And there was a lot of casualties that I mentioned the 40% number. A lot of people, based on some of those reasons that you just gave, exited.
You kind of almost lost a generation, if you like.
Yeah.
Anyone new starting, it was almost impossible to get through that unless, the place had the equity. But if you didn't have that behind you, it was just one challenge after another to get through that. Now, that said, as we've come out the other side of it, we with the national strategy, and I call that next 10 years, 2010 to 2020, kind of the recovery and restructuring period. A lot of things came out of it, like the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And we were well prepared as we moved into that era to be a leader in the world. Oddly enough, obviously survival forces the greatest level of efficiency you can in an industry just to get through it. And the ones coming out of it were probably the most efficient producers anywhere in the world. So it's one of those things where we missed the high of, and maybe Ann talked about that, but 2003, we're just heading into the peak of the cycle there. So we lost the high of the cycle, and then we got the low end of the cycle further exacerbated by, as I mentioned, not just BSE, but the currency, and then the Great Recession.
Yeah.
So, we it wasn't just a unique Canadian thing in that latter part of that decade. There were a lot of other places in the world obviously were impacted by the recession, but it certainly reshaped our industry in a way that hopefully we never ever live through again. But that's just one of those things that when you go through that much trauma, that's inevitably some of the outcome.
Yeah, I think trauma is a good word. Like, we've had a lot of feedback this week from producers really across the country. And, Anne used the word, it brings back fear. I have heard from a lot of people, just, talking about this is sending a chill up my spine. Like there is like there's an emotional side to this, and the unknown of what was in front of people that the only comparison, and it hasn't happened thankfully, is like is like an ASF kind of event, right? And so I think what we went through at BSE sort of probably we take those learnings and we apply it to probably the preventative side of ASF and stuff like that. It's a bone chilling. Like it just brings up a lot of emotion from people in terms of what they went through.
Yeah, it certainly, when people actually start to really reflect on it, I've seen, people, especially when they're visiting about it and talking about it, start to tear up.
Yeah.
It really was one of the darkest times, we'll ever, hopefully ever see. And, it is, I can't remember, might have been Jeff Warwick. One of them mentioned, how are you doing? It says, well, it just depends how attached you are to your equity. Um, it's one of those things where, you don't even know what your place is worth anymore. You have
Yeah.
no idea
Yeah.
what your cattle are worth. And, I will say, the lending industry in Canada, and maybe it's because everybody's in the big boat at the time, but, there was a genuine effort between the disaster programs. And, you have to give great kudos to the provinces and people like Minister McClellan from Alberta, as we went through this, there was a whole range of things that, you'd kind of, from a lending side, they were working their way through it. On the market side, we were trying to work our way through it and had set asides. The relief programs, we had to keep, um, refining them, because as you got through it, the impact would affect different or sectors differently. So then you had to get in looking at, how do you slow down marketings? And, we also tried to, keep more heifers in the herd because it kept them out of feedlots.
Mm.
But we still needed the set aside because of the costs, and trying to at least create some market equilibrium to get the market starting to function in a more competitive way. That all improved the minute, the U.S. border reopened, because suddenly we had more capacity and could move those animals. But there were a lot of different considerations, and it really did affect every producer in somewhat different ways because of their circumstances.
As you reflect on it, are there any different decisions you wish you would have made, like through the process? Like, this is such a you're blazing a new trail as you're trying to sort this through and rectify the issues and call. Anne had talked about the amount of calls she at Canfax, they felt like they were a part-time psychiatrist trying to help people steer them to the other side of this from a mental standpoint. As you were going through this and making decisions yourself or as a group, like I envisioned kind of like you talked about kind of like a war room. Is there anything in that path where it's like, yeah, okay, at that moment, I wish we would have done this. We would have, we would have maybe got a quicker outcome or whatever. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I'm not sure there's, any specific thing like that when you're going through an investigation, and a lot of the decisions were going to be made by other countries. I think we learned we needed more resources in dealing on the international side, which we fairly quickly did. Alberta beef producers, provinces were providing more and more funding as we were suddenly dealing with, and they were pulling out of reserves because when there's no marketings, there's no checkoff income.
Yeah.
So, fortunately, we had the funding to do all of this, and it really, I think, signifies how important the checkoff system is and how important the provincial portion of that checkoff, because that's where all that money came from to do that. And then, BIC did a great job on the demand side, but in hindsight, we learned we need, and we did, and now continue to have a permanent person in Washington. So dealing on the international side, there were just so many moving parts to this. I think we would get great marks for the fact that we maintained that trust with Canadians and saw that. I think we learned a lesson: never ever let our 5-year, those days I think it was Growing Together or Growing Forward was the name of the 5-year. Now it's the Canadian Agriculture Program. Never let those expire. Make sure, or if they do, that they have a bridging piece to it. And if we could have moved more quickly on getting investment in processing capacity, by the time that investment in capacity started to really grow, then the U.S. border opened. So I think we all know, and we actually opposed the first disaster relief program, because it would be there until the border opened. And that was even for beef. And we told them if the border opens for beef, we're still going to have the same number of cattle around. So it's not going to improve the market. You'll just have people suddenly having the same very low prices for fed cattle, and they wouldn't have any disaster support, and that we'd end up with people just trying to almost sell cattle for the fear of the border opening. And that's precisely what happened. You may recall there was some absolutely incredible margins in beef processing in that early sort of June, July, August period. Again, Canadian support and demand was really high. So, we had that great support, but we had more cattle than there were places to get them processed. So, that just put all of the market power into, the purchaser. And, so if we could have probably addressed that, moved the set-aside programs up earlier, those are things that are all now in our hopefully never need to use file over here, that these are things you need to work with almost immediately. I think it was such a hopefully it's a novel event that anytime you go through something like that with all of those unknowns, I'm sure there are many things and we'd make sure we'd be better prepared for, but one of the things I always say is luck favors the prepared. And we had made the preparations related to the measures I talked about earlier to ensure that if there was any exposure to BSE, it wasn't circulating in our herd. So that kept the actual risk of BSE really low. The real risk became the trade actions. There never really was any human risk in this, but people and the world was still pretty paranoid about an unknown disease that was invariably fatal if it became variant CJD. And there were all kinds of
what stupid video, Dennis. But remember that video of that dairy animal in the UK? Everybody, the news kept on showing that.
Remember at the time there were even some people saying there could be tens of thousands, or even one, I think, group was a bit extreme, put the number much higher than that. And the Imperial group, I think, came out and said they thought it'd be 600 or 700 deaths, and they were chastised for such a low estimate, and it turned out that it was around 250, 257. There's some unconfirmed cases of people that, and obviously that's tragic, but that they had over 1 million head of cattle in the UK that they believe were infected with BSE at the peak. They had no idea why it was happening or what was causing it. So, and we would have one or two. So, the risk was 1 million times effectively higher than what we were dealing with in Canada. And but the science was still evolving. And it wasn't until about 2010, 2011, they had the Spongiform Encephalopathy Advisory Committee in the UK or in the EU and UK that were doing all of the research. And they pretty well folded up the tent in 2010, 2011, because they felt they had pretty much researched as much as they could, and they knew that the feed ban measures were very, very effectively controlling. All you have to do is look at the graphs and see when they introduced feed bans. So, they started to move away, but unfortunately, we still have a couple countries that are that still have a few remnants, even though the WOA or the OIE in those days, quit even reporting annually in 2016, the number, because it was so rare to ever find a case of classical BSE. So, it's one of those things when you're dealing with still evolving science, and they even changed the BSE code. And interesting enough, the person, Gardner Murray, who was the CVO from Australia, was the one who actually led the rewriting of the BSE code, which was adopted, I believe, in 2006, which created the, undetermined, but controlled and negligible risk categories, and kind of the conditions, depending which SRM, specified risk material, you'd move. But based on that, every country should have opened up to beef just simply on your following the OIE guidelines, and most did. It would take a few years, but there's still a few remnants. But even the guidelines or rules, if you like, those are kind of the informal rules around trade with BSE. They were all being negotiated, but at the same time we were going through this, and the new code was being implemented. So there were a lot of different pieces that were happening, and of course, from our experience, we also became pretty active in that whole international rulemaking process.
Naturally.
So, yeah. So anyhow, I think as we look back, there's, it's almost any time you get an event like that, you can, sort of like they say with the battle, as soon as the first shot is fired, most plans, you're already working on your next plan. I think there's as many, positive, things that, because we have an industry that had the foresight to have funding available to deal with that. I know personally, between May 20th and the beginning of November, I flew 167,000 miles.
Incredible.
Like I talked earlier, and there really wasn't. There was just meeting after meeting after meeting that it was absolutely essential we were at, and making sure whatever solutions were being developed would actually work for cattle producers, and having the best information on what was happening with the negotiations, because people were trying to make financial decisions. It would sort of be based on, well, if the market's not going to open, I have to do this. If there is hope the markets are going to open, well, then I can plan to do this, and I can sort of try and manage till we get there. And like any one of these things, you need as current information as you can, right, on every single farm and ranch, to be making decisions that help you in whatever way possible to manage yourself so you can get through the other side. And that was tough with all of the uncertainties, but all you could do was make sure we had the most current information we could share.
Dennis, really appreciate you sharing your personal reflections on those early days, and the events that transpired afterwards. And just really, really appreciate it. It was a very, very dark day, as you put it. It was a dark time, and producers that lived through it, or who aren't producing now in the beef industry because of it, will never forget it. And so I really appreciate you sharing your experiences here today and all the work that yourself and everybody at CCA put in. You mentioned a lot of names there. There's a lot of people that were a part of trying to get us to the other side. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And, I'm sure tomorrow we'll reflect even more on it. So.
Absolutely. Want to encourage everybody to check out all of our coverage of BSE Reflections on this 20-year anniversary. Some great conversations like the one we just had with Dennis here. And keep sending us your feedback, your memories, and what you went through. Really appreciate that. There's been a flood of them, and they all mean something and contribute to the story of what happened over that period of time. Thanks so much, everybody.